And before doing this, I would like to tell two things. Marty is out, but I have to say that I share his suspiciousness to the word or term ontological, maybe more to the adjective form ontological than the nominative form ontology. So it will be not used, as you will see. And the other thing is that one of important aspects of all this what we are doing here is the difference between existence and justification, in a way in which existence is object of a truth-falsity criterion, while justification is dealing with reasons for and against. But in a way we face something strange, a kind of a primacy of actuality, which gives something similar to justification by the very fact of existing. So very often when we say that something is factual or a fact, part of what we say is that that is implying somehow some kind of justification. Okay, so belonging as a social and institutional fact. I chose the term belonging. I hope you'll see not participating, because participating is a weaker term than belonging. Participation is a kind of precondition or something that precedes the belonging, which is more strong relationship, implying some kind being a part of the institution or some social reality that is implying a set of obligations based on a scheme of mutual interests, and perhaps also implying some rights after that. Okay. Our world consists of facts, some of which we find as part of the reality independent of of our action, but some of which we produce. However, there are two very different kinds of these produced facts. Some of them we produce by successful employment of some means to produce ends we set, and upon realization, the results of our effort exist as a consequence of our decision to produce them, decisions being causes of these consequences, but exist independently afterwards in the same independent way as the first kind of facts, the facts we didn't produce, independently of our presence they exist. When we look around ourselves, we can see the huge multitude of things which would not exist if we didn't decide them to exist. These things mix with other truly independently existing things in a world in which it is difficult or impossible to distinguish what is pure natural and what is, if I may say so, merely natural, but being there only because we decided them to be there. The incredible network of paved roads overcrowded with cars makes it difficult to conceive the natural moonlight in the streets, for example. We produced much of our world as we have it now, but after being produced, it exists there by itself. This part of the world would not exist without actions and decisions based in someone's desires and intentions. And most of it, but in a sense also all of it, was the result of collective endeavor, not only as an accumulation of individual efforts, but also in a sense that those individual efforts would not be possible without collective schemes within which they were possible at all. Other animals are also capable to do this, as Karl Popper showed in Objective Knowledge, for example, in describing what he calls the third world. Here we find not only direct products of collective animals like bees, but also many other forms of produced reality, becoming autonomous in their existence and even being usable by others in different ways. Animal paths in the forest, for example, that we used to, reusable nests used by other species upon being abandoned, etc. However, now, upon being produced, at least part of what is real there in this produced reality is independent of us after being produced, although a crucial part of it would not survive without us. If we suddenly disappear, almost everything at first would appear the same, except that almost nothing would function at all, or even if functioning, it would not serve its purpose. The purposes are never independent of us, being our purposes, our goals and ends that we set to be realized. For example, I may quote here Searle from Mind, Language and Society from 1998. Functions are never observer independent. Only causation is observer independent. What functions add to causation is normativity and teleology, end of quote. That's page 122. Still, there is a part of this reality which remains to exist independent of us either as users or observers, so we may conclude that produced reality is factual in the same or similar sense in which the rest of natural reality is factual, which also would lose all its purposefulness without us, despite being entirely independent in its raw reality, brute facts as described, for example, by Anscombe or Searle in 1964 in the famous article and others. But there is a part of produced reality which is not observer independent in this sense at all. The reality of this part of the produced world is such that it entirely depends on our believing in its reality, and without this believing it would stop and cease to exist. Nothing would remain except perhaps the memory of their existence, but without any traces of any factuality of their own. The issue is more complex than this. There is a reverse impact of functions and teleology producing real-world results. For example, the above-mentioned network of roads and streets we see around us is the product of more or less efficient employment of taxation, which is possible only because the money, as showed by Chris Wellman, for example, which exists only as an institutional kind of reality, has a capacity to produce real causes, effects in the realm of natural world. So without taxation, we wouldn't have the streets, sidewalks, and things like that. But taxation is entirely artificial in that sense. The factuality of institutional facts is such that nothing remains after it's being described as such, as institutional facts. Their reality, as well as their actuality, is entirely observer-dependent. What remains is something else. After money has been spent in roads, there are roads, no money. Abandoned chess boards can be used for many purposes, but there is no chess there anymore. To exist, chess must be played. Although institutional facts exist only because we believe them to be there, their existence does not depend on our actual desires and sincerity. By being produced through our believing their existence, they are real facts, not something arbitrary or fictional. This complex structure of the fabric of reality is not easy to grasp, and this difficulty might be the reason for many kinds of attempted reductionism, which we witnessed all the time again, especially in the philosophy. There are several points of interest here. Searle speaks of the nature and mode of existence of human social institutional reality. Human social reality. Human social and institutional reality. Social institutional, just in the same line. As if social and institutional comes in a package, as if being almost the same. So making the social world, 2010, at the very beginning. It is not only produced by humans, but it is observer independent and exists only because and only as long as we believe it exists. The moment we stop to recognize and accept it, it does not exist any longer. The natural remnants are only the physical matter on which social and institutional reality parasitized or supervened. Searle's favorite example is money and how it exists. We here in this country can remember hyperinflation in 1993, when in one moment, the moment lasted more than a week, about 10, 11 days, money faded away, disappeared, expired in the same sense in which a credit card can expire, leaving behind only worthless pieces of paper or plastic. And it's a very strange experience. Maybe some epistemological benefit we had in that experience with all other costs, but it was terrible and awful in a way. Try to imagine this, that out of sudden there is no money around. But the factuality of that kind of reality has been not only produced, it's been created as if from nothing, and then attached to some external pieces of physical reality as pure burdens, which are essentially replaceable. Whatever these pieces of physical matter are, they are not a part of the definition of what counts as real and valid there. Not paper, not electronic impulses, not whatever in the money is the bearer, is not the part of what the money is, or what the fact, institutional fact of the money there is. Playing the game is the fact, but the metal is not part of that fact. Strange implication anyway. So the social facts, however, do not necessarily have this feature. Some of them are not produced by any intentional activity and are not based in any visible decision-making process. Language is the example. Although language is not the volume of the sound produced with intention or with the purpose to be used as tools to talk, talking is not the sound. The meaning, which is the core part of the reality of the language, is indeed observant dependent. But at the same time, it is not created by the employment of a constitutive rule which defines which X, sound or whatever, in the physical world will count as that particular meaning. It's not been created by, in the way in which institutional facts are created. There is no such rule. The similar is the case with family relationships or nations in the sense of a people, not in the Anglo-Saxon sense of collective within the boundaries of the state, citizenship. Although these relationships are the matter of social convention, they are not the product of a valid employment of some constitutive rule. Going to the point, we may say that social facts are not reducible to institutional facts, although all institutional facts might be social facts. It is not here the proper place to go deeper into this matter. Let me just conclude, for the purpose of the introduction to this paper, that social facts, although observer-dependent and in that sense artificial, still are a kind of reality which is more regulated than constitutive, and so more the object of some prospective regulative rules than the constitutive ones. My working hypothesis is that social facts are taking a place or behaving as a kind of brute facts in relation to some institutional facts relying on them. Some social facts are real in the sense in which the life is real. Dynamic whole, where the life is showing its capacities, first of all the capacity to initiate intending, deciding and acting, i.e. the capacity of freedom and the power to make things to be different from what they would be otherwise. On the other side, institutional facts are entirely produced by first a decision to set a goal or iterative and repetitive nature, general purpose which require a rule for its being orderly or i.e. validly realized, and second, producing a constitutive rule which will ensure the realization of that purpose in that orderly, i.e. valid way. This means that singular decisions are not institutional facts, although they are arguable facts, both natural and social, along with presumably being special kind of phenomena, irreducible to anything factual in natural sense. Decisions still are a crucial part in the structure of institutional reality. First, decisions play a constitutive role in establishing constitutive rules. Constitutive rules are decisions of a kind. Second, decisions play then a role in every occasion of applying the constitutive rule, but in a very specific way. It wouldn't be as in the case where decisions, as it should be, are based in the freedom as the capacity to decide, but the decisions are taken as being there from before. Decisions are frozen in the constitutive rule, the orderliness contained in the rule being a kind of container of the freedom, a means of its reiterated, not only postponed, efficiency and validity, repetitive. And third, decisions are latently present in the act of recognition and acceptance of the constitutive rule, which is visible in the fact that it can be revoked or abandoned with disastrous consequences to all factuality contained in the institution defined by certain constitutive rule, but not, and this shows very firm feature of factuality of institutional facts for past instances of its application. Past institutional facts survive the destruction of the institution. All this should show the firmness and stability of the factuality present in institutional facts. Actually, they are firmer than natural facts. They are more resistant. They are real facts, not something unstable and also not something easily changing. The logic and structure of the institutional reality is very complex and described in many details in works of John Searle. My point here is that the independence of the observer, as Searle designates this crucial feature of this kind of reality, is not the specificity of institutional facts, as social facts have the same feature without necessarily being institutional in their character. Social facts often function as brute facts in relation to institutional facts, but this is a general feature of iteration, which is crucial part of the structure of the institutional network. Institutional facts, e.g. a contract, might become a brute kind of fact in relation to another kind of institutional fact, like, let's say, marriage. Generally, institutional facts do not exist in isolation, but in a complex interrelations with each other. Again, Mind, Language, and Society by Searle, page 130. The conclusion, there are two different distinctions overlapping each other, the distinction between brute and institutional fact, and the distinction between social and institutional facts. Two overlapping distinctions. But these distinctions are only two among more present there in the construction of the reality. Natural facts, which are brute, are often, but not necessarily, ingredients of the whole which exists of as the actual reality, social and institutional world. The second part of my point is that this difference has a clear and important consequence to the nature of the basic characteristics of my main thesis, that belonging to a collective present in both social and institutional facts has different articulation of the belonging to those two kinds of collectives are present necessarily in the construing both social and institutional reality. What are collectives, or which kind of collectives we face here? In short, there are two kinds of collectives as sets of individuals. The difference follows from the minimal definition of life as the activity of setting goals and attempting to realize them. One set of individuals is a simply aggregate, a set of individuals connected externally by a characteristic which does not indicate and cannot give a definition of any cohesive power of the collective, as the individual are only member of the aggregate, which, although it could have a joint goal, e.g. to cross the street on green light, has no unity, no oneness, and is not an entity that has a decision-making power, despite having the same goal. Unlike, for example, a group walking together, and then I rely on Margaret Gilbert at various places, which has a procedure of its becoming a group, a procedure of entering to the group, inviting, refusing, leaving, etc. Nothing of the sort we can detect in a group of persons crossing a street on green or waiting together on the sidewalk on red. They are together, they all have the same goal, but nevertheless the group has no collective identity. Identity is oneness, which would make this group to be a collective with decision-making power. Having such a power would make that collective liable to be responsible, i.e. praiseworthy, guilty, blamable, etc. If life is defined as the capacity to set ends and attempt to realize them, then a group capable to set ends and attempt to realize them would be a living thing. This capacity, the capacity of freedom, is the basis of identity, and such a collective is a kind of social and presumably institutional fact, belonging to which implies a set of obligations and possibly rights as the part of that fact of belonging. But at the same time, collective identity of this kind entails irreducibility to any set of features or relations of its members, such as, e.g., cost-benefit analysis in terms of well-being of its member, independently what the constitutive rule of this collective requires. And they require the maintenance, as it were, of what has been instituted, where the collective became an independent entity capable to do on its own. This capacity is worth, I think, of further investigation. But let me say only in a very brief way that it is a sign of both social and institutional life. This means that a collective with identity, collective capable to do on its own, as Hobbes one place say, that collective behaves as one and is not reducible to any relation, any set of relations or properties of its members, is a social fact, a temporal being, long or short living being, sometimes very short, as that group people might create a state in which a social fact would become an institutional fact on top of being a social fact. This brings us to the next section, belonging as a social and institutional fact. Belonging is not more participating, is not mere participating in a social or institutional framework. It is more than that. Within social reality, there are institutions when you can participate without belonging, but arguably there are such positions. Such position is at least implicitly defined as one which does not correlate with belonging, while the issue of participating in an institutional activity might be more complex. Some act of recognition or accepting might be needed for any participation in any institutional activities, perhaps not the same one which we define belonging. In creating social facts which compose social reality, decisions might be skipped, as many of such facts are a matter of status quo ante, which also might not be a matter of any prior decision making. Its original reality does not depend on us, as we didn't choose its originating in the first place, and also there is no traceable point in past time in which we can locate a decision to create that feature of status quo ante according to which something is a social fact now, as meanings of divorce or changing of those meanings. The word sick or awful becomes something very positive lately, despite the furor of writers of the dictionaries. E.g. that I am a son of my father, not in biological sense, but in the sense that being a father or a son is a social role. As a part of status quo ante, any institutional fact is a raw social fact. Where it is also an institutional fact, there it is the result of successful application of a constitutive rule defining its articulation and its functions. In both cases, it has a property of being an active member of a collective. Active is here a key word. It does not mean high level of activity, but only what has been described in the particular constitutive rule as doing what has been required by the rule of the game of that social role, which is not that precisely defined or prescribed, as in the case of institutions where constitutive rules define with adequate precision what is to be done. This precision is not formally definable and regularly has certain room of latitude for free interpretation. Both father and son have some obligations and to a lesser extent some rights, but they are not fixed. Those rights and obligations, especially rights, are not fixed and enforceable unless becoming more institutional matter, which is the tendency these days when we tend to formalize and legalize all aspects of life with a huge price on the horizon, destruction, the difference between morality and law, and so also the difference of mind and time between ours and yours. As within institutional reality, belonging is something rather different, precisely in terms of the precision of what is to be done. Now, it is precisely defined what it does mean. Institutional factuality is more demanding, with clear obligations that follow. This is secured by constitutive rules of institutions, which at the same time define the purpose of those institutions and how they function, determining so what is the reality there and what is not. It should go without saying that all institutional facts are also social facts, although there are social facts that are not institutional facts. I repeat this because it's worth it to be repeated. Now, from the point of view of institutional logic, where we have two aspects or sides, how we can look to what we find in this reality, internal and external, we can say that although we have a full reality looking from the internal point of view, it is different when we look from the external point of view. That's, again, another Searlean aspect of the structure of institutional reality, which may produce the impression that belonging might be seen from both angles, internal and external. But precisely that is not the case. As far as it is factual, there is only internal viewpoint. The external viewpoint does not exist at all. That's why belonging is a fact, social, institutional, or both of it. It can be only social fact. You are a Jew outside Israel, in Jordan, for example, or it can be only an institutional fact. You are an Israeli government official, although you are an Arab, not a Jew. Or you can be both, a Jew and Israeli official at the same time, which will be your properties even after being captured and taken by enemies and taken outside of the territory of Israel, in Jordan, for example. Your properties will follow you, even if they are only institutional. You cannot just at will cease to be what you are. And all change possible has to go through the procedure which has to take these social and especially institutional facts as factors of utmost importance. Although you would be something different if you resigned before being captured. For instance, the fact that you did not make you did not make your position entirely internal, implying that anything external is of only theoretical or hypothetical importance. Belonging implies all the burden of consequences in a very strong sense in which those consequences are causally produced by institutional facts as real causes through its factuality. There is a kind of necessity by which causes produce their consequences. This necessity, despite the fact that causes are only institutional facts, has the same causal power as any other kind of causes. The nature of causality is always the same. What does internal include? If belonging is having such a cardinal consequences, this question seems to be of utmost importance, but we may presume that there are differences in the scope of the stringency of this causal power. The above announced discussion of the reductionism as a problem we have in the interpretation of what belonging is now comes to be elaborated. One of the main problems is not just the main problem we encounter now in our approach to institutional reality is the interpretation according to which the factuality of institutional facts, being not only observant dependent but also produced by our decisions to recognize and accept some rules, does not entail independent obligatoriness as the final and non-reducible justification for the factuality of the consequences of belonging. The example may be the justification of coercion of the state in enforcing our obeying the requirements contained in institutional rules like laws. It has become rather common to think that coercion of the state is not or cannot be consensual. That we didn't consent to be coerced to pay taxes, for example, and that the justification for this coercion should be some cost-benefit analysis. It's justified because it's useful, not because we gave the permission to be taxed. So in the book, Is There a Duty to Obey the Law?, Christopher Wellman argues that non-consensual coercion present in, e.g., slavery, is similar to the coercion to, e.g., pay taxes, i.e. that enforced paying taxes differs from slavery, not in that form is consensual, but in that the coercion non-consensual in both is in taxation justified because the benefits of those coerced to pay taxes outweigh the costs to the point that those costs are not, as Wellman says, unreasonable high. Political coercion, that's quotation from this book, Is There a Duty to Obey the Law? Political coercion is in fact justified only if, unlike slavery, it does not impose unreasonable costs upon those non-consensual coerced. That is from the book 2005, page 16 to 17. The reason of this kind of argumentation prevailing in contemporary literature is, as I see it, in ignoring and disregarding the differences between external and internal type of reasoning in articulation of institutional logic, and seeing the fact that internal position is the factual and external is not. it becomes visible in the way how Wellman tries to prove that states shouldn't and cannot be perceived as private agencies selling services to those who want to buy security and other benefits, where one of the main assumptions is that private agencies serve only those clients who freely sign up and promise to supply the crucial benefits without any non-consensual coercion. So corporations are not free in that sense in which institutions like states are not or couldn't be. This means that in states, unlike private enterprises, corporations, we do not have freedom to sign up, and that there are necessarily some non-consensual coercion, implying that without any non-consensual coercion means a private relation like the one we find in the relation of buying. Buying is free, or otherwise it's not that. In states, we do not have buying. The coercion there is therefore necessarily non-consensual. It is interesting what we have behind this piece of logic. It is justified that we, as individuals, become a subject of non-consensual coercion only because the costs of costs are not unreasonably high, and the benefits are high enough. Only because of that, corporations cannot offer that balance. If they could, they would be better. The assumptions behind these are the following. First, the acceptance of the state rights to collect taxes is actually fictional and insincere, which is shown by the calculation of the ratio between costs and benefits being the only justification of the coercion. Second, the collective has no identity and is entirely an aggregate of individuals which retain the power of calculating what and why it is good. Third, there is no obligation present there after giving a consent, because the consent has not been given in the first place. So the concept of loyalty and the like, which could bring some obligation even to the situation when it is not clear or it is not the case that costs of coercion are not too high, such concepts cannot have any real meaning. Fourth, the locus of to whom the costs should be allocated is strictly individual, which implies some very strict and mechanical concept of egalitarian type of distributive justice. And five, it's not clear who is to collect or how that becomes the reality. There are certainly other such features. Let me add a comment only regarding the first. If the final and only justification of coercion was the cost-benefit ratio, it would be like if the final and only justification of the promise was the cost-benefit ratio of fulfilling or the promise, with the implication that if the cost of fulfilling a promise is too high, it will be entirely justified without further question to break that promise. That is, for example, elaborated in William Godwin a long time ago. The promise is justified only when it's useful, because of which it's irrational, because you cannot know in advance if it will be useful at the point of fulfilling. But this is not how the promise works. It works as an institution, making fulfilling the promise to be in accordance with the constitutive rules of that institution, and breaking it not to be in accordance with that rule. But precisely that is the content of the institution fact, that a promise has been given, not in the ratio that costs of the sticking to the institution is not high compared to its fulfilling. There is no external position, only internal. If this was the case, we never could attain generality of this possibility to open external position was the case. We never could attain generality of an institution, and there would not be any rule, certainly not a constitutive one, which means that after giving a promise, the scope of what we can justifiably do is narrowed, as is narrowed the scope of valid reasons for what we do. But it does not mean that we are not free after giving a promise, that we entered something in its structure similar to slavery. On the contrary, the freedom to give or not to give the promise has been retained in our freedom to fulfill it. That's what we freely have chosen to do, but have frozen that will or that decision. It is the same as prior, and it is the same us, the same we, as you said, prior and after giving a promise. And that say is the content of what we have accepted in accepting the rule of the institutional promise. There is something to what we gave our consent. Not that the consent has to be restricted to one point in time and cannot extend to the future. The power of freedom is precisely that, overcoming the next point in the future and coming to some further future. On the contrary, the purpose of the promise is precisely to overcome the next, the next point in time and make a decision, and that's the nature of making a decision. Every decision is an act of such overcoming of the next point of time. We are not mechanisms. We do not function on the basis of the calculation of the costs and benefits balance. Back to belonging. Belonging is an institutional fact in a similar sense in which a given promise is an institutional fact. After being given, its factuality produces all kinds of cardinal consequences. The act of giving is, however, free, and this freedom makes it to be the promise, not something else. Similarly, in belonging, we have consent as the validating factor. The consent is the act analogous to giving a promise, and this consent is both actual and present all the time, again in a similar sense in which the freedom needed to give a promise is present after the act of giving, and that freedom is present there in the same shape and nature as it was present there before giving it. Otherwise, fulfilling the promise would be either subject of calculation or a mechanical consequence, in both cases without this validating factor making it free and at the same time obligatory. Free and obligatory at the same time. But the promise is not the matter of ex post facto calculation, nor the mechanical necessary consequence of uttering some words or doing something else which constitutes the promise. Otherwise, it would be like an event or not an act. We know this by our capacity to change our mind and to break the promise. What we cannot do is to break the promise without this to be counted as such. This is not institutional. This is institutional in institutional logic. Broken promises are failures, not successes, regardless of anything else what could make breaking to be somehow good. Breaking it is possible, of course, all the time. We can change our mind after giving the promise. But it is not possible to fulfill a promise by breaking it. The same with belonging. Everything institutional and also everything actual is coming from the freedom to fulfill the obligations derived from the institutional factuality. But it's factuality. The logic of constitution present in the point of creation or the institutional fact requires this demanding structure of the point of its creation. This point is irreversible, both in defining which game we are entering at that point and putting a set of requirements which become valid in this irreversible sense to be valid until being revoked. We cannot pretend to play soccer by playing basketball or whatever. By starting to play one game, we have to follow the set of the rules defined that game, and not out of the sudden say but I'd like rather play something else. Until then, the existence is actual, it is a fact. It cannot be just dismissed invoking attractive, individualistic, liberal, quasi-theories according to which the collectives are or have to be reducible to their members. Collectives in the game are individuals. Collectives are individuals. Collectives are those onenesses, and they are also free. So both individualism and liberalism are preserved in dealing with real collectives. They are individual and they are free. So the liberalism has been preserved. This brings us to the issue of reversible points, which I didn't finish, and is short. So what seems to me to be of utmost importance, that logic of irreversibility, the point at which the decision had been made, although we may not know which point it is. In the case of war, very often the irreversible point, or always, has occurred prior to the act of declaration of the war, which we take to be as a starting point. But starting point is that irreversible point after which we cannot return because we committed to this position of having only internal aspect of the institution and how somehow made external position non-factual. Consent or giving a promise functions as a dividing point between an open space of possibilities and the human condition of being under the restraint of rule of orders. So open space and restrained space. This point is irreversible in a very strong sense. It cannot be circumvented or ignored or disregarded. It can be violated, but this violation cannot be disregarded as irrelevant by some obscure claim not to be eligible but not getting the imprimatur of some prevailing belief, which functions as a prejudice being secured by the obviousness protecting prejudices. The fact that the obligation implied from any social or institutional fact can be violated does not follow that other criteria can simply enter the field and overtake as more important. These other criteria might be of high normative appeal, e.g. well-being or justice, but this wouldn't make a difference in factuality of normative force coming from irreversible points in which institutional facts has been created. So neither well-being nor justice can make breaking a promise justified in this institutional sense. For example, if it's just that. For example, if a promise is not maximizing the well-being, it wouldn't stop to be promise. It wouldn't lose its normative content and be obligatory. What will be the final decision is another issue. A criminal might decide to violate laws, but that's what's making criminal to be real free. This wouldn't be the negation of normative force of those laws, however. There is no indicative logic there by saying that you have a negation, and by having a negation, you have a rejection of the universal proposition or universal sentence in the first class. No modus ponens. The whole social and institutional fabric on our world is structured like this, having always some actual irreversible points as markers of what there is real, as points at which institutional facts become real. Social and institutional facts are facts, not notions. They have to start to exist, and this is where irreversible points are real. After becoming real, institutional facts, equally or similarly to social facts, exist sub specie eternitatis, showing their relation to values, purposes, goals, ends, as the source of their existence, not being raw natural phenomena. These irreversible points in which institutional facts are created by a decision as if from nothing are producing a new reality which then supervenes or parasitizes on natural reality. This feature of dependence on natural order is just one more factor of dependence. Social and institutional fact depend all the time, from the beginning to the end, on our decisions to accept their reality. However, this does not mean that this reality is less real or that these facts are less factual than any other facts in the world. Belonging is one of those facts, one of the most important we have in the world we created. Thank you.
Thank you very much.